You just spent $20 on a fresh bottle of magic fish catching juice. You spray it all over your bait, cast it out into the freezing water, and you wait, and you wait, and nothing happens. You probably think the fish just are not biting today, right? Well, what if I told you that the very scent you are using to attract those fish is actually the exact thing chasing them away? That is right. In cold water, your favorite summer attractant literally becomes a chemical fish repellent. Today, we are going to break down exactly why you need to stop putting summer grease on your winter jigs and how a simple change in your tackle box will instantly cure your cold water skunk. This is a massive topic for fishermen because we are creatures of habit. If a specific garlic dip or crawfish oil caught us 50 base in the middle of July, we naturally assume it is going to work just as well in the middle of December. We get stuck in our ways, repeating the exact same routines year after year. We have been brainwashed by old-school fishing magazines and tackle shop rumors into believing that you must always mask your human scent with heavy oils. But when the water temperature plummets, the entire playing field completely flips. The physical rules of the water change, and more importantly, the biological rules of the fish change. If you do not understand how cold water alters your fishing sense, you will spend the entire winter shivering on a boat or a frozen bank, completely clueless as to why the guy next to you is pulling up fish after fish while your rod stays dead straight. Imagine waking up at 5 in the morning to hit your favorite lake. The frost is incredibly thick on your windshield and the air bites at your face. You get to the water, rig up your absolute favorite plastic worm, and generously dip it in that same magic sauce you trusted all summer long. You sit there for 3 solid hours without a single nibble. You start blaming the cloudy weather, the falling barometer, or maybe you just think the fish have entirely moved to deeper water. But the hard truth is that the scent you are using is acting like a massive warning beacon. In cold water, everything about the chemical environment completely changes. The sweet-smelling garlic or crawfish oil that triggered aggressive strikes in warm water is now actively working against you. The dynamics of cold water change how molecules behave on a fundamental level. Instead of dispersing naturally and creating a tempting, delicious scent trail, your expensive commercial attractant is just turning into a toxic-smelling blob of useless grease. It is time to seriously rethink everything you thought you knew about applying scent to your lures. Let us have a serious talk about oil-based fishing scents. This is the classic, old-school method that your grandfather probably swore by. For decades, guys have been relying on thick, heavy, oil-based attractants. They practically pour it over every single lure in their tackle box. But here is the unfortunate reality about those traditional methods. Oil and water already do not mix very well under normal circumstances. But when that water temperature is hovering right around 35 or 40 degrees, oil-based scents become an absolute nightmare for your fishing presentation. The freezing point of the synthetic oils used in many of these cheap products is actually surprisingly high. When you dip your jig into that oily mess and throw it into a freezing river, the oil does not wash off and create a cloud. Instead, the extreme cold causes it to instantly congeal. It transforms into a hard, sticky, waxy substance right on the surface of your lure. You are completely ruining the feel of your bait. If you are struggling to believe me about the oil issue, try this simple visualization. Picture yourself cooking breakfast. Imagine taking a hot pan full of liquid bacon grease and pouring it directly into a bucket of freezing ice water. What happens almost immediately? The grease instantly seizes up and turns into a solid, white, nasty lump of hard fat. That is exactly what your favorite oil-based spray is doing to your jig the second it breaks the surface of a winter lake. When a sluggish winter fish finally decides to cruise by and inspect your offering, they are desperately looking for something that feels and acts like a living creature. When they bump that bait with their nose and feel a weird, unnatural crust of congealed oil, they are going to completely spook. They will turn around and swim away faster than you can blink. You honestly thought you were giving them a delicious appetizer, but you actually just served them a cold, hard candle. This is exactly why so many people fail during the winter months. Now we need to look deeply at fish biology during these frigid cold water months. When the water gets down into the high 30s or low 40s, the metabolism of a bass or walleye slows down to an absolute crawl. They are simply not aggressively chasing down massive meals like they do in the blazing heat of August. They become incredibly picky, highly observant, and very lethargic. Their digestive systems are barely functioning. Because of this physiological change, their survival instincts tell them to avoid anything that seems overly rich, highly chemical, or difficult to digest. A massive dose of artificial, heavy oil-based scent triggers an instant warning signal in their tiny brains. It smells way too strong and completely unnatural for a freezing environment. In the summer, a strong scent cuts through murky, warm water and triggers a reaction. But in crystal clear, freezing water, applying thick scent is like walking into a tiny closet where someone just smashed an entire bottle of cheap cologne. It makes you sick to your stomach. Let us tackle the great garlic fishing myth once and for all. Almost every single fisherman has a brightly colored bottle of garlic dip somewhere in their boat. It has been a tackle box staple for over 40 years. And sure, garlic is an incredible tool in the middle of summer when the water is 80 degrees. But heavily using garlic oil in near-freezing water is a catastrophic mistake. First of all, the chemical compounds in garlic oil become incredibly bitter when they are exposed to a rapid cold shock. The exact composition that smells like a tasty, easy meal in warm water becomes harsh, acidic, and unnatural in the cold. Picture yourself sitting on a frozen bucket. Your hands are completely numb. You dip your plastic worm in that green garlic dye, and you cast it out. The fish swimming by are suddenly getting blasted by an overpowering, bitter chemical smell that does not exist anywhere in a frozen lake. You are basically putting up a giant flashing stop sign right in front of your hook. So what about alcohol-based attractants? Some smart fishermen think they are totally outsmarting the system by switching to alcohol-based sprays because, as we all know, alcohol does not freeze. That sounds incredibly smart on paper, right? But here is the massive flaw in that specific logic. Alcohol is a powerful solvent. When you spray an alcohol-based scent onto your soft plastic bait and throw it into a freezing water column, the alcohol rapidly dissipates, leaving behind a very sharp, highly unnatural chemical trail. In cold water, a fish has a very delicate sense of smell that is highly sensitive to abrupt chemical changes. The sudden burst of dissolving alcohol acts exactly like an astringent. It actually burns their delicate olfactory receptors. Imagine taking a very deep breath right over a bottle of strong rubbing alcohol. It forces you to pull your head back instantly. That is the exact same violent reaction a fish has when it swims into your alcohol cloud in 38-degree water. This directly brings us to the famous more is better fallacy that plagues our sport. We, as fishermen, have a terrible, unbreakable habit. We constantly assume that if 2 little drops of scent are good, then soaking the entire bait in a bucket of juice for 10 minutes must be absolutely incredible. This is completely wrong, especially in cold water conditions. In the dead of winter, natural prey items like a dying shad or a lethargic crawfish emit extremely faint, barely detectable scent trails. They are barely putting off any odor at all. When you completely drown your bait in a commercial attractant, you are creating a massive scent profile that is thousands of times stronger than anything naturally occurring in the lake. You are practically screaming at the fish through a megaphone when they are expecting a quiet whisper. You sit in your boat, shivering in the wind, wondering why your electronics show 20 fish right beneath you, but they simply refuse to bite. It is because your bait is terrifying them. You absolutely must understand the major difference between natural and artificial scent triggers. In freezing cold water, the only scents that truly produce consistent bites are those based entirely on natural amino acids. Amino acids are the fundamental building blocks of aquatic life, and predator fish are biologically programmed from birth to seek them out. When a small baitfish dies in the cold, its decaying body slowly releases specific proteins and amino acids directly into the surrounding water. This is exactly what a hungry predator is searching for, but unfortunately most cheap commercial fishing scents are completely synthetic. They are heavily manufactured in a chemical lab to smell incredibly good to the fisherman standing in the tackle shop, not to the fish swimming in the lake. When you use a synthetic strawberry or bubblegum scent in the winter, it completely lacks those vital natural proteins. The fish investigate, realize it has zero nutritional value, and immediately swim away. The late fall transition period is exactly where most guys get it completely wrong. During the fall turnover, when the surface water temperature starts drastically plummeting from the high 60s down into the lower 40s, you absolutely have to change your entire strategy. You cannot just keep fishing the exact same way you did a month ago. I constantly see guys out on the lake in late November wearing heavy insulated winter coats, but still stubbornly using the exact same summer dips and sprays they used in July. This is a very crucial mistake. The very moment that water temperature officially drops below 50 degrees, you need to completely purge your boat of those heavy, oil-based summer attractants. Put them in a cardboard box and leave them safely in your garage until next May. If you refuse to make this mental shift, you are going to spend the next 3 months freezing your hands off for absolutely zero reward. The fish have adapted, and you need to adapt with them. Let us take a moment to visualize the actual strike zone in frigid cold water. Back in the summer, the strike zone might be 10 or 15 feet wide. A highly aggressive fish will literally charge out of a dense weed bed to completely crush a fast-moving spinnerbait. But in the dead of winter, that massive strike zone shrinks down to the size of a small dinner plate. The fish are sitting extremely tight to the muddy bottom, barely moving an inch in order to conserve their precious energy. You have to put your bait exactly on their nose and leave it right there. They are going to stare at it for a very long time. They are going to visually inspect every single microscopic inch of it. If your bait is heavily smothered in a thick, unnatural scent, that chemical is going to pool heavily around the bait in a visible dense cloud. In this slow-motion game of underwater cat and mouse, your unnatural scent is giving the weary fish way too much time to figure out that your offering is completely fake. Scent retention on different types of winter lures also plays an incredibly massive role in your success or failure. Think carefully about what exactly you are putting that powerful scent on. If you apply a heavy liquid attractant to a smooth, soft plastic swimbait in cold water, it is just going to sit awkwardly on the surface like a greasy, shiny film. It will completely fail to penetrate the plastic because the extreme cold causes the artificial plastic to constrict and harden up. But what if you are using a classic hair jig? Hair jigs are undeniably incredible in cold water, but if you put an oil-based scent on natural bucktail or marabou feathers, you absolutely ruin the entire lure. The heavy oil deeply mats the delicate hair down. Instead of beautifully pulsing and breathing naturally in the slow current, your expensive hair jig looks exactly like a wet, sad rat being dragged across the rocks. You are single-handedly killing the mechanical action of your own bait. So after all of this, what actually works when the temperature drops? You need to start actively looking for strictly water-soluble attractants. Water-soluble simply means that the specific scent compound breaks down and naturally dissolves in water, completely regardless of how cold the temperature gets. Even in 35-degree freezing water, a high-quality water-soluble scent will slowly and naturally dissipate, creating a very subtle, highly effective chum line. These are usually the fishing products that do not look nearly as flashy on the shelf. They might be messy dry powders or very thin, watery liquids, but let me tell you, they are the absolute secret weapon of professional winter fishermen. Because they are not based on heavy animal fats or synthetic oils, they never congeal on your hook. They do not turn your expensive soft plastics into useless wax candles. They simply wash away at a very slow, highly controlled rate, releasing those crucial natural amino acids. Let us take a moment to talk about another famous old-school remedy, pure anise oil. Your grandfather or your father probably kept a little glass bottle of black licorice-smelling liquid carefully tucked away in their vintage tackle box. And for many decades, older generations have sworn up and down that anise oil is the absolute greatest fish catcher on planet Earth. But here is the historical context you are completely missing right now. Back in the day, those guys were mostly fishing natural lakes and rivers during warmer summer months, or they were putting just a tiny microscopic drop of anise directly onto live bait. The squirming live bait was doing 99% of the actual work. If you take straight concentrated anise oil today and soak a completely synthetic piece of plastic in it during a brutal winter freeze, you are creating an underwater disaster. In near-freezing water, that strong licorice smell becomes so heavily concentrated and harsh that it physically repels anything swimming nearby. There is a very specific phenomenon I like to personally call the dead water effect. When you are vertically fishing a very deep winter hole, there is almost zero water current moving through that area. The water down there is incredibly stagnant, highly dense, and absolutely freezing cold. If you drop a heavy jig completely coated in a thick, synthetic scent gel down into that dark hole, the gel totally fails to disperse. It just sits heavily right there on the bottom like a toxic chemical spill. Because the surrounding water is so incredibly dense and cold, the scent just slowly oozes out in a heavy, concentrated puddle directly around your hook. Imagine a curious fish gently swimming up to investigate your bait. Instead of finding a subtle, natural hint of food, they slam right into a solid, invisible wall of concentrated chemical gel. It is physically repulsive to them. You have completely transformed your prime fishing spot into an unapproachable quarantine zone. It is also absolutely vital to deeply understand how severe cold water physically dulls a fish's natural sense of smell. Yes, their predatory senses are usually very sharp, but extreme winter cold dramatically slows down the internal chemical reactions happening inside their olfactory receptors. Because their sense of smell is slightly impaired by the cold, they rely much more heavily on recognizing the exact, highly specific chemical signatures of the natural forage they normally eat. If you suddenly introduce a completely alien synthetic smell, like artificial crawfish or bright bubblegum, it thoroughly confuses their already slowed-down brain. They simply cannot process why this incredibly strange, overwhelmingly strong odor is sitting right in the middle of their quiet winter holding area. When a fish gets confused in cold water, it does not strike out of curiosity. It completely shuts down. It heavily locks its jaw tight and completely refuses to eat anything at all. A lot of experienced guys will argue loudly that they only ever use scent to mask unnatural human odors. They deeply worry about the lingering smell of tobacco smoke, boat gasoline, or heavy sunscreen on their bare hands. That is definitely a very valid and logical concern. You absolutely do not want your delicate winter bait smelling like a dirty gas station pump. But here is the massive problem with that line of thinking. Using a bad cold water repelling scent just to cover up some spilled gasoline is exactly like intentionally setting your own house on fire just to kill a tiny spider. Yes, you technically masked the bad human scent, but you completely replaced it with something that is equally terrifying to the fish. If you are truly worried about weird smells on your hands in the dead of winter, the absolute best thing you can do is simply wash your bare hands directly in the freezing lake water, or rub them vigorously in the natural mud on the bank before you tie your knots. If you are sitting there and you still stubbornly think your absolute favorite summer dip is perfectly fine for ice fishing or late fall casting, I highly encourage you to try the ice water glass test right in your own kitchen tonight. Take a clear drinking glass, fill it all the way up with crushed ice, and pour in some cold tap water. Let it sit on the counter for about 5 minutes until the entire glass is totally freezing cold to the touch. Now take your favorite oil-based fishing scent and drop a few good, heavy squirts right into the exact middle of the glass. I want you to watch very closely what happens next. It absolutely will not dissolve smoothly. It will not create a nice, attractive, cloudy mixture. It will immediately clump up into nasty, stringy, waxy little balls of grease that awkwardly float to the top or stubbornly stick to the sides of the glass. Now ask yourself honestly, is that gross, waxy mess what you actually want covering your hook? So how exactly should you adjust your personal approach when you actually do need a little extra advantage in the bitter cold? The absolute golden rule of winter scent application is that less is always more. If you truly feel that you absolutely must use a scent product, you should be carefully applying it with the tiny wooden tip of a toothpick, not by blindly pouring it out of a giant squeeze bottle. You want just the absolute tiniest microscopic smear of a high-quality, water-soluble, natural enzyme product. You only want enough scent to give the biting fish a very fleeting, temporary hint of flavor when they actually clamp down on the soft plastic. You absolutely do not want them to smell your bait from 10 or 20 feet away. You want them to bite the bait simply because it looks incredibly real, and then you want that tiny, natural hint of flavor to quickly convince them to hold on for just an extra half second so you can finally set the hook properly. This exact biological reason is precisely why natural live bait is so incredibly and undeniably dominant during the harsh winter months. A lot of modern guys completely refuse to use absolutely anything but artificial plastics, and that is perfectly fine. But you really have to understand why the old guy sitting right next to you fishing with a simple crushed minnow head is catching 10 times as many fish as you are. That natural minnow head is slowly releasing pure, natural proteins, real blood, and perfect amino acids at a rate that is flawlessly suited for the freezing cold water. It is definitely not overpowering, but it is 100% authentic to the environment. If you stubbornly insist on exclusively using plastics, you absolutely have to find a way to mimic that highly natural release. Some extremely successful guys will even take a very tiny piece of a real nightcrawler and simply tip their artificial jig with it, completely throwing their liquid sprays in the trash. The ultimate, undeniable takeaway here is that you seriously need to stop endlessly fighting against Mother Nature. Cold water winter fishing is already hard enough on its own. You have frozen rod guides, completely numb fingers, brutal winds, and lethargic fish that barely want to move an inch. Do not make this sport significantly harder on yourself by accidentally turning your expensive lures into harsh chemical deterrents. I want you to take a very hard, honest look at the tackle you are bringing to the frozen lake this winter. Read the tiny warning labels on your scent bottles. If the first ingredient is heavily oil-based, if it strongly smells like a harsh chemical perfume, or if it is heavily dyed with powerful industrial solvents, leave it sitting at home. Switch entirely to subtle, water-soluble pastes, or just confidently rely on the pure, natural, slow mechanical action of your favorite winter bait. You will be absolutely amazed at the difference. The absolute craziest part about all of this is realizing that the very thing you spent your hard-earned money on to help you catch more fish was secretly turning into a frozen, waxy, flavorless piece of garbage under the surface. Once you fully grasp that cold water fundamentally changes the chemistry of your bait, you instantly gain a massive advantage over 90% of the fishermen out there who are still dunking their jigs in summer grease. By simply dropping those heavy oils and switching to subtle, water-soluble amino acids or entirely natural presentations, you are going to see your winter catch rate absolutely skyrocket. Thank you so much for watching and learning with us today. If this completely changed how you look at your tackle box, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a huge like on the video. Now I want to hear directly from you. Head down to the comments and let me know, what is your absolute favorite cold water bait, and have you ever noticed your scent freezing up on you in the winter?